Welcome back, everybody, to today's episode of the School on a Mission podcast. I am Andrew McPeak here with our wonderfully grounded Gina Watts.
I am.
You are grounded.
It feels like an electrical outlet or something.
It does. It also means good things in terms of emotions.
Oh, okay. That's good. That's true.
Well, folks, if you listening to this believe that schools should be more than just essays and GPAs, if you believe that EQs are just as important as IQs, and if you expect amazing things from the next generation, then you're in the right place, because we do too.
Well, and today's episode is especially timely, Andrew. We're exploring what it looks like to support Gen Z and their emotional health, their motivations, and how we can best lead and learn alongside them, both in the classroom and the workplace.
Yes. And that brings us to today's question.
Yep.
This is going to be fun. So, Gina, what's something you've learned from Gen Z that has shifted the way you lead or teach?
Yeah, I don't know if it's shifted anything. I think maybe I have a heightened awareness about it. But I find more and more that young people and Gen Z are just hungry for authenticity, transparency, honesty. They're not looking for perfection. And the irony of that is that they've grown up in a society like totally surrounded by social media, which is all about showing your best highlights and polished versions of yourself. And actually they want the complete opposite. They want like no perfection, no polish, like no
Something
performance
might be going on there.
Yeah. They just want to be authentically seen and heard, as well as they want you to deliver yourself authentically and transparently.
Yeah.
So
good and so true. If you're putting up your highlight reels for Gen Z, you're going to lose them pretty quick.
Yeah.
I think that's true.
Yeah. How about you?
Well, so I mean, I've done a lot of writing and thinking and learning about Generation Z. I've also done my fair share of leading Generation Z in the workplace as interns and even younger staff members. Years ago, Tim, who's going to be on this podcast with us, he and I worked on a book on Generation Z called Generation Z Unfiltered. And we summarized something that we had both been recognizing in terms of what kind of leadership shift does Gen Z require? And we summed it up into three things. Number one is trust has to be earned. In other words, you cannot expect that just because you're in a position of authority means that your opinion, your thought, your advice is automatically trusted.
Not gonna happen.
That would have been true 30 years ago, maybe, but not true today. So trust has to be earned, which is a really weird spot for adults who are expecting to walk in and for their words to carry weight and meaning. That's not true with them. The second one is that relationships have to be established. And you kind of referenced this, but you cannot really have a conversation of meaning with them until you've done the work of building a relationship with them. And that kind of goes hand in hand with that trust thing too. But the third factor, so trust must be earned, relationships must be established. The third factor is that hope must be offered. I think Generation Z has grown up in a very anxious-ridden, anxiety-ridden world. And oftentimes when they're looking to adults, they're looking for somebody to tell them it's going to be okay, that they have what it takes. Today's generation is often lacking in confidence. And so to have somebody come alongside them and go, hey, it's hard, but I think you've got what it takes.
Right.
It's just a powerful, powerful message. So are we earning trust? Are we building relationships? Are we offering hope? I think about that all the time when I'm leading Gen Z.
I love that. I love that. Well, today we get to hear from Dr. Tim Elmore. And I can't think of anyone better to help us understand Gen Z than him.
I can't either. I've spent a lot of time with Tim, and I actually had the chance to sit down with him for this conversation. Dr. Tim Elmore, he's actually the founder of Growing Leaders, and we had an incredible conversation as he's continuing to develop his perspective and insight on who this generation is. For those who don't know, Generation Z, often we say, is born around the turn of the 21st century. So these young people are in our middle schools, our high schools, our colleges and universities, but they're also 20-somethings in the workforce. And so as we talk about leading Gen Z, I just want my school administrators to put on both their hat for thinking about Gen Z as students in their classrooms, but also as young, new teachers that they're hiring right now. Is like, y'all are hiring Gen Z right now. So we're just going to keep that in mind. So more about Tim. For those who don't know Tim, he's a best-selling author, keynote speaker. He's the founder of Growing Leaders, as I said, which is a nonprofit. Growing Leaders is a nonprofit equipping young people with leadership skills and emotional intelligence. He has trained more than 500,000 leaders around the world. He's written over 30 books, including the Habitude series, Generation Z Unfiltered that I mentioned before. He wrote a book a couple years ago called A New Kind of Diversity, talking about all the generations. But he actually, one of the reasons we had this conversation is he also has a brand new book that's coming out right now. It's called The Future Begins with Z. He has a remarkable gift for turning research and stories into practical tools for growth. And in today's episode, we talk about what Gen Z needs most from their teachers and supervisors, how we can help them build emotional strength, and why honest connection is the key to generational understanding. So first, let's meet Tim and hear the story behind why he started Growing Leaders.
Sure. Andrew, it's always good to be with you. We had many years doing a podcast together out of the Growing Leaders studio. So it's fun to be back with you. For anybody that doesn't know, I am the founder of Growing Leaders. And I started Growing Leaders in 2003. It's a nonprofit that comes alongside of schools and universities and sports teams, wherever young people are. And we try to build skill sets that are beyond academics. So life skills and leadership qualities that we think young people need to become flourishing adults after they graduate, better employees and employers, better marriage partners, etc. So, and really, Andrew, you know this, but it might be helpful for someone to, if they're wondering, why would you do that? I had been working with John Maxwell for 20 years prior to starting Growing Leaders. Started in 1983. And so it was a natural outgrowth of this love of leadership I had learned under John in my 20s and 30s to start Growing Leaders and kind of do what John was doing for the business world, but for young people. So that's who I am.
It's always so great to hear that story told. I obviously have heard it a bunch of times, but Tim's heart for developing young people always shines through. And it's amazing to me that after 40 years of impacting kids, he hasn't lost it. And we get to see it up close and personal every day.
Yeah, it is such a gift. And I don't take that lightly that we get to spend that kind of time with him. And this conversation is packed with the kind of perspective you only get from those decades of studying and equipping generations.
Absolutely. Okay, so up next, Tim dives into what Gen Z is facing right now and how we can lead and support them with both empathy and insight.
When I started Growing Leaders in 2003, both schools and parents had already begun to double down on academics, pushing kids to make the grade, make the cut, get the scholarship. That just became almost a mono focus for us. I don't know exactly why, except that we know we wanted prestige if we got into an Ivy League school, or we wanted the scholarship we got if we got into any school. But this report card we gave ourselves as grown-ups on what success looked like for kids did some good and some damage. So when I started Growing Leaders, I wanted to come alongside of schools and help build skills that they were going to need to flourish that were beyond reading, writing, arithmetic. I'll tell you an interesting story, Andrew. In a recent focus group with Gen Z teens, they were all employees, but they were teenagers at a quick service restaurant. One of them spoke for all of them when she admitted, I guess I default to my phone and get on Instagram and TikTok as an escape from the academic pressure I feel the rest of the day. And that would make sense. It's kind of like you can be goofy, for however long on TikTok because nothing else is goofy, writing this paper or taking that SAT test or whatever. So the pressure, again, is either from parents, educators, or it can be self-imposed. But I feel like, to answer your question, Gen Z, as they grew up, much more than millennials or Gen Xers, for sure, has wrestled with social and emotional needs that weren't as high. All kids need to develop socially and emotionally, but it's because we were focused so much on that academic report card. So one last thought real quick before you volley back. Pam and I were talking, my wife Pam and I were talking the other day about if we did it over again, this parent thing, I would definitely focus less on schools and more on skills. In other words, finding the right school, this great prestigious college to go to, and focus on skills. I'd focus less on explanations and more on experiences. Rather than explaining to my children, this is what life's about, let them experience it. Let them skin their knee and find out, and then guide them. But they experience it. They don't just hear a talk from dad. And then, Andrew, you've heard me say this over and over and over. I do less protecting and more preparing. Certainly, I want my kids safe, but I think we neglected preparing them for all the elements beyond academics sometimes that kids really, really, really need. So bottom line, if I can put a ribbon around this, I think we were all ambushed by what those portable devices did to us in the 21st century. And so a pandemic plus a smartphone just tends to lead to mental health issues that we're going to need to face. And we were ambushed. We didn't quite know what was happening.
All right, Andrew, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I so appreciate Tim naming the pressure cooker Gen Z is growing up in, and how that pressure cooker doesn't just come from school, but from every direction.
Yeah.
It's real, and it's reshaping how young people see themselves and the world around them.
Yeah. Well, it's always been true with Tim that one of the things I really respect about him is how he doesn't just diagnose the issue. He helps us imagine a better way. Like you said, less protecting, more preparing. That's a shift we can all learn from, whether we're parents, educators, or leaders of any kind.
So if this is resonating with you, friends, you'll definitely want to check out Tim's newest book, The Future Begins with Z. We'll link it in the show notes. And it's full of research, insight, and practical ideas, like all of Tim's content, for understanding and leading this next generation.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, in this book, Tim writes about a growing gap in emotional intelligence and how many Gen Z students and young professionals are struggling to manage their emotions, build resilience, and navigate relationships. So we asked him, what's behind that emotional gap and what can we as leaders do about it?
Yeah. Wow. Big question. Well, you're absolutely right. Employers, managers, hiring, HR directors are finding Gen Z very, very different than older generations, including the millennials. According to resumebuilder.com nationwide survey, 4 out of 5 managers are saying Gen Z is the toughest generation to manage. 4 out of 5. And almost a third of them are saying, I'm avoiding hiring them altogether. Well, that is not a path forward. That Gen Z represents the future. We represent the past. So we've got to figure out a way to rather than just avoiding them. So let me tell you what concerns me. It's fixable, but I want to articulate it here. Andrew, you and I worked together on a book years ago called Marching Off the Map. And in that book, we talked about the origin of the public school system. Horace Mann, this legend back in 1859, made some statements about how schools needed to shift their focus. And Horace Mann said back in 1859 that building a student's character was just as important as reading, writing, and arithmetic. So he was already seeing our predisposition to focus on, math skills, reading skills, and those are important for sure. But he was saying, are we getting citizens ready? I mean, that was even a question he asked. Are we getting them ready to be contributing citizens to this nation of ours? Well, for some reason, we stopped paying attention to that original mission that he had, and we left the model. And so I believe we've got to have a holistic approach if these Gen Zers are going to enter the workplace ready for their careers. So I'm in Milwaukee right now. You and I are talking virtually, and I'm about to speak at an event here to about 1,000 employees. And my subject, Andrew, is the surprising connection between emotional intelligence and grit. I can hardly wait. I can hardly wait to hear what I'm going to say. But here's what I've noticed when I look at the numbers. As AI increases, EQ tends to decrease. In other words, if I'm depending on a terribly smart gizmo or device to do my thinking for me or my answers for me or whatever, I'm not building those skill sets that I need. So Andrew, think for a minute. When you brought up the social and emotional intelligence, think about the 4 ingredients of emotional intelligence. It's my self-awareness. It's my self-management. I can manage myself, my social awareness, and my relationship management. Well, you can see if I have developed those, I have muscles in those areas, I can show more grit. I can persist in a relationship when I would want to quit, or I can continue on a task when I would want to stop and look for something more entertaining. So the more we let something or someone do it for us, the less we are emotionally intelligent. And I actually think, even though you didn't ask, I actually think grit and EQ is very much connected. And Andrew, think about it. How many times have we talked to educators or employers and they said, man, we just don't see the grit in these kids today. Well, my gosh, I think they have just as much resilience as kids ever had, but we're reducing it. We're taking that away from them by giving them a world of speed and convenience where they don't build those muscles. So you ask, how do we help? Well, I would offer a few ideas, and Andrew, I welcome you to jump in with your own. But I think we're going to have to help young people simplify their lives. I don't know a way forward unless we take some of the multitasking and some of the incredible volume of messaging coming at them and simplify it just a little bit. So that's one. When our kids were growing up, I've said this before, I think on the podcast, we let them do one extracurricular activity per semester, not 14. I don't care about all your friends and what they're doing. You're picking one. And then we're going to actually have dinner together many nights during the week as a family. Number 2, we're going to have find places to keep them moving. Everybody knows physical fitness is a thing now, and it's an issue because sitting is the new smoking. We've all heard that phrase. So I think we're going to have to find ways to nudge them out. So instead of playing a video game, why not play a game that gets you moving outside? When you're studying for an exam or for your spelling test if you're younger, why not shoot hoops out the driveway and go over those words together with physical movement going on at the same time? Andrew, I think we're going to have to equip them to pause and breathe and focus. We talked about mindfulness before, and I know it's kind of a hocus pocus term for some of our listeners, but I think we need to help our young people manage their minds and not just let anything be dumped in, but to pause, breathe, and then focus on one item, not several. And then lastly, I think we're going to have to help give Gen Z tools to manage their mental health. That may be the most important of all. In other words, stress is a normal part of life. We're never going to be without some level of stress. It's what makes us strong. We've all heard stories of astronauts going up into space, and when gravity's not an issue, our muscles aren't as strong, okay? They atrophy. So I think we need to talk to Gen Z about steps to manage their anxiety, which might include reducing hours on social media, maybe 2 hours a day or less. That's what Gene Twenge tells us. Seeing a counselor maybe is what's in store for them, or even taking medication. I think medication shouldn't be the first resort, but it should be perhaps a last resort once they've done all the healthy, holistic things they can do. Maybe that's what's in store for them. So I'll stop there, but I feel like we're going to have to be proactive, not reactive. And this should be just as important as a school subject academically in the classroom.
Okay, Gina, that was pretty packed. Tim just laid out a powerful case for rethinking how we're preparing Gen Z, both in the classroom and in the workplace.
Yeah. And I think, Andrew, it's important to note that it's not about lowering expectations. That's not what he's saying. It's about actually helping this generation build the muscles they'll need for life: emotional intelligence, grit, balance, and resilience.
Yeah. And Tim reminded us what we told everybody at the beginning, right? Leading Gen Z is not just about leading students. Some of you are leading Gen Z teachers and staff members too. So the conversation isn't just academic, it's relational as well.
So if you ever found yourself saying, why don't they just, or when I was that age, this is your moment to lean in and lead with intention.
So coming up next, we asked Tim to dive deeper into the role that technology plays, not just in Gen Z's emotional health, but in our health too, in teachers, leaders, and caregivers. No one's immune. So stay with us.
Yeah, great. That's a great question. Well, I applaud the schools that are strong enough to go to a no phone policy. I know it's controversial, but I like it. However, we all know technology is not going away, and I don't think many of us want it to go away. So I think we're going to have to build these young leaders from the inside out. How can I manage myself so I'm not a slave to my portal device or the social media or whatever? So I think that the first step I would recommend taking if you're a teacher or a parent or both for that matter is I think we're going to have to demonstrate empathy for these young people and speak belief. So let me unpack that real quick. I think the first thing that our students need to receive from us is they need to think, this adult in front of me really understands and empathizes with my plight. Even if we don't fully, we've got to somehow demonstrate, I get it's hard. If we don't, they're always going to feel like they need to defend how hard it is until we convince them, I get it. I really get it. Life is hard. But then I think we need to speak belief, meaning life has always been hard, sweetheart. You know, it really has. I don't think I'd want to go back 100 years where all kinds of things were wreaking havoc, the Spanish flu and everything else. So I think we need to assure them it is hard for sure. I'm not telling you and that's not, but we've got to speak belief. Think what it says to a young person when a teacher says to them in a classroom, yeah, this is tough, but I know you. You've got it in you to do this. I have watched you long enough. I think you could conquer this. What that does to a student is priceless. So let them understand you know their plight and then communicate your belief. The other thing I want to add to this, Andrew, I thought about this as I was thinking about this question. You remember Charles Duhigg a few years ago did a great book called Super Communicators. And in that book, he talks about the need for us to recognize the kind of conversation we're having with that person in front of us. So teachers or parents listening, think about that student that's in front of you. And then as they begin to complain or whatever they're saying, recognize it's one of three conversations. And Charles Duhigg helps us here. He says you're either having a practical conversation, so that's really simple. These interactions are all about transmitting information. They're telling you they're not ready for the test, or they're telling you this or that. So in this, there's little emotion, pretty much all information. It revolves around subject matter. Okay, no one gets hurt or offended. It's just about facts. Those are easy. Okay, but you need to recognize that that's what you're needing or they're needing. You just have a practical conversation. The second one gets a little more complicated. It's a social conversation. So these are interactions that focus on people and what happened. So a student may come in and say something that just happened last Friday night, and maybe they get a fact wrong, okay? Maybe they completely misquote what happened, and you know. And what you want to do is step in and have a practical conversation when really what they're wanting to do is have a social. Forget all the details and the data. Just let me enjoy this moment. You follow me there? There may be passion or levity in this kind of conversation, but others engage in it because it's really about their identity, not their information being accurate. I had to stop correcting my daughter when she was sharing something because I didn't realize it was a social conversation. She wasn't even minding getting all of her facts right. She just wanted to tell me about the concert, you know? The third level, though, is the most complicated. And this is where I have slipped up over the years. It's an emotional conversation. And this may appear to be social or practical at first, but these interactions are all about how we feel about ourselves and what's happened. They revolve around how we feel. And if a student needs to have an emotional conversation about how stressed out they are, let's say, and you come in with, well, here's some data you need to know. 24% actually, blah, blah, blah. That's just not going to help them. And Andrew, you know me, you know my strengths and my weaknesses. I am so practical sometimes. I just want to share information. So let me give you an illustration. Let me paint a picture. Imagine you're at a beach, okay? And you see out in the water a young person drowning. You could start yelling to them, you shouldn't be out there in the water. It's dangerous. There's no lifeguard on duty. There's no swimming after 3 p.m. You should have taken swimming lessons. Okay, all those are true, but that doesn't help them right now. They need a life jacket. And that's like moving from a practical to a social or an emotional conversation. Give them what they need in the moment, be who they need, and then move to some solutions. I think if we don't do that, all the information, which might be accurate, doesn't even get through because we're not having the right conversation. So.
Okay, Andrew, in all sincerity, I am still thinking about that beach metaphor.
No, it's awesome.
How many times have we all, teachers, leaders, parents, accidentally tossed a manual at someone who just needed a life jacket?
Yeah.
I mean, I know I like words, so I probably have done it more than I should admit. For real though, Tim's insight on the 3 types of conversations, the practical, the social, and emotional, it's just such a game changer. Recognizing what kind of moment you're in can transform your relationship and help you to throw the right thing.
Yeah.
Right? Not a manual, maybe a life jacket.
It was so brilliant. I love that terminology, how practical that was. I think it's also important that we note Tim's reminder to speak belief, right? We talked about this at the top of the episode, but Gen Z needs to hear, I see you, I believe in you, you've got this. That kind of affirmation doesn't just build confidence, it builds connection. And that connection can then become the foundation for supporting students and staff through something we all face, stress and anxiety, which is a really big challenge for them. So I asked him to unpack what's really going on for Gen Z and what we can actually do to help.
Well, I would say first and foremost to seasoned veterans in the school system, department heads, maybe administrators, I think we have to address this issue of mental health head on. And I know you need to get results. The numbers need to be up at the end of the school year. But I think we'll better get to the results if we address the mental health and then see how it helps us reach the numbers we need to reach. I hope that makes sense. I'm not saying instead of being a school, be a therapy, a therapy group. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying I think the schools that address the mental health problems first and foremost and head on get to the results they want a little bit later. So first and foremost, listeners, I would encourage you to think for a minute about the world that Gen Z has grown up in and has entered their career in. So they wrestle with mental health issues now more than they ever have. They're aware of national and global tragedies, younger than ever. So when they're in 5th grade with a smartphone, they know about the war in Ukraine and the battles going on between Hamas and Israel and in the Gaza Strip, and they just know all of that. And I didn't when I was that age. They witness more mass shootings each year than we have days in the year. There's been a few years in a row where we've seen those numbers, more mass shootings than we have days in the year. I wouldn't want to grow up in that time. They feel relentless academic and social pressure. We just talked about that, to perform and compete. Just feel with that. Sometimes they think moms and dads are expecting them to move on to professional sports, and they're not going to. We need to know they're going to be a software programmer, not a shortstop for the Red Sox. They feel they're constantly captured on video and then critiqued when it's posted. Think about that pressure. They've observed polarized adult generations. I'm sometimes embarrassed with adult behavior and what it models for young people today. And then finally, in my list here, they're a part of what I call the pandemic population living in an uncertain economy. Andrew, I just was at an event where I met with some students, and they said the words that we found as we did that book, Pandemic Population. I feel postponed. I feel penalized. Even now, 5 years after the pandemic started, they still feel a little behind. And that flies in the face of that ambition that they might have. Like, I'm already losing. So here's what's most sad about that, though, if you don't mind me waxing eloquent here, okay? Sometimes when we are mindful of all these stressors that they have, we feel that the answer is just to pity them for all of this and then reduce the stressors in their life. We've assumed the answer to their hardship is to remove the hardship. And in some cases, that might be right, but I don't think that's the answer. Think about it. When I remove a hardship, when that's the answer, it feels good in the moment to that student, but it doesn't feel good in the long run because we've just said, oh, bless your heart. You're not up to this challenge. Let me just take it away from you. And suddenly we've put the Superman cape on and gone in to rescue the child rather than putting that Superman cape on them. So that's why we got to start with empathy. I know this is hard, but I believe you can do this. So, Andrew, I'm going to refer back to some of the stuff we put in the book, Pandemic Population. If you remember, that's the first time we published some of the results of trauma, Gen Z going through trauma. And if you remember at the time, Barna Research had just come out with the data that 82% of members of Gen Z believe they have been traumatized at least once in their life, meaning some experience of trauma. Okay? That's a lot, 82%, 8 out of 10. But what we assume, I think, as caring adults is, oh, they might have some level of PTSD if they've gone through trauma, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. At some level, not high, but maybe some level. And while that may be true, 4 out of 5 people that go through trauma don't end up with PTSD. They end up with PTG. They might experience a little PTSD for a while, but then someone guides them into post-traumatic growth. And PTG occurs when a person endures a trauma and yet has, now get this, a guide to help them make sense of it and see the positive outcomes that can come. People from this emerge stronger, kinder, wiser, and more grateful. Those are the 4 outcomes of PTG. So let me tell you a quick story. I was meeting with Jackson, a young person in high school who was feeling stressors in his life. He was a student athlete. He was trying to make straight A's like a lot of kids do, which is not wrong, but he had pressures coming athletically, academically, socially. So we were meeting mostly at Starbucks, and over a latte or a frappuccino, we started talking about the image, candles or brush fires. Now, listeners, if you've not heard this, this might be something you can take and use as a conversation starter. So, Andrew, you know this well. Please bear with me as I unpack this image, this metaphor. So candles and brush fires are both flames, right? They're both fire. But there's a huge difference between how each of those fires handle pressure, okay? You can put a candle out with a small breath. Think about your last birthday. It didn't take a huge wind to blow out those candles. Even if you're old, you still put those candles out with just a tiny breath. A brush fire, however, not only can withstand a small breath, it can withstand a harsh wind. And what I love most about the brush fire is it not only can endure a harsh wind, it actually gets bigger and stronger. In January of 2025, we all remember being glued to our TV watching those brush fires in Palisades in California. For a month, they went on and it was crazy. They couldn't get those out of control. You know what I remember hearing, Andrew? I would watch, the news, the national news on TV, and they would say, "Oh, tomorrow's going to be worse. Harsh winds are coming in California." And what they meant was the fires are going to get bigger. Now, think about this. When we have stress or pressure in our life, we can profile it either as, oh, we're just candles. We might go out. Please take the harsh wind away. Or we could say, what if we saw ourselves as a brush fire? That we're not only going to endure and make it, we're going to get stronger. So when I was meeting with Jackson, we started talking about this image. And it was really kind of fun because we started texting each other, and because I had hard days and he had hard days. The hardness was very different, but we both had hard days. But I remember him going through finals, and I asked how he was feeling, just wanted to check up on him. And I love the text message I got back. He said, and I've got this written down, I'm going to quote him, "I'm going to do great during my finals. I'm not a candle. I'm a brush fire." So I'm loving it when students can simply reframe the issue and say, yep, this is hard. I'm not in denial. I'm not saying it's not hard. I'm saying I'm harder. I am a brush fire. I will find a way to not only make it, but get stronger. So my 4-step formula, I've got a formula, Andrew, is to resolve that you're going to keep going, not quit, to adapt. Okay, what do you need to do differently now that this is in front of you and it's different than what you expected at the moment? And then to reverse, how can I take this harsh wind to the stressor and actually make it my advantage? How can I make the disadvantage my advantage? And then finally to excel in that new direction. So resolve, adapt, reverse, and excel. Interestingly, that spells the word rare. I think you're a rare individual when you do this. So Andrew, do you remember talking about Louis Braille? Louis Braille was that kid in the 19th century. And we both have marveled at how that story went, but I'll give you the headlines real quick. It might be something listeners can use. Louis was a preschooler. He was like 3 or 4 years old and he lived in France. He went out to his dad's tool shed one day and he was just messing around as a young child does. But he got one of those awls in his mind, AWLS, one of those sharp tools that you can puncture a hole in leather. Well, he was playing with it, and this poor little Louis poked his eye out. And it was tragic. He ran inside screaming, and his mom and dad saw that his eye had gotten poked out. Well, within a matter of time, the infection passed over to the other eye, and young Louis went completely blind by the time he would have been in kindergarten today. Well, it was awful, but I'm so glad his parents didn't give up and didn't let him give up on schooling. So they found a school for the blind just outside of Paris. They were not in Paris, so they drove all the way, they didn't drive. They rode the horse all the way over there, and they turned Louis loose into this school. But Louis quickly discovered in his elementary school age that even the reading for the blind that they had there was not efficient. In fact, there really wasn't a system yet. It was a system that the French army had kind of come up with to help soldiers in darkness at nighttime kind of read, but they still had some sight. So it was really quite pitiful. So at 11 years old, the equivalent of a 5th or 6th grader, Louis starts working on a system for helping blind people read. After all, he was one. By age 15, I love this story. 15, what would that be? Freshman or sophomore today? At age 15, Louis develops a system for reading for the blind with raised dots. And of course, we still use that system today. The Braille, Louis Braille, the Braille system for the blind is used all over the world. Now, here's the story behind the story that I love the most. The tool that Louis used to create this system was the very tool that had taken his sight away, the awl in his dad's tool shed. So he reversed it. He resolved, I'm going to keep moving forward. He adapted. He's in a school for the blind, not a regular school. He reversed it by using the very tool that had taken his sight away to now give him an ability to read. And then he excelled. And of course, he grew to be an incredible man. And I'm so glad that that young person back in the 1800s practiced this thing with the with the trauma. May I say that? With the trauma that he had in his life. So I'll stop there.
Man, Andrew, I mean, I know it's Tim and he's a friend of ours and we get to learn from him as a mentor, but that was rich. From pandemic pressures to the story of Louis Braille, Tim just walked us through what so many of our students experience. And let's be honest, we ourselves have been navigating.
Yeah.
I kept thinking about how easy it is to forget the weight that Gen Z carries.
Yeah. And they do carry weight, don't they? It's that constant stream of a crisis, the academic pressure, social scrutiny. It's a lot. But I love what Tim highlighted too. The resilience, it doesn't come from removing hardship. It comes from reframing hardship.
Yep.
Whether you're leading students or coaching young staff, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all the mental health challenges that young people are carrying. But in this next part of the conversation, Tim gives us a mindset shift that I think could change everything.
Wow. Andrew, I think if I were to boil it down to one shift, there could be a million here, but it would be for you, listener, to move from empathy to compassion. So earlier I talked about being empathetic. It needs to start there. We need to feel with them in what they feel. But when we move to compassion, we now take action where we're doing more than feeling. We're helping them resolve the stressor or get to the answer of their issue. So here's an analogy. It'd be the difference between if you're a patient in a hospital about to be treated for a disease there, would you rather have a friend next to your bed or a doctor next to your bed? Now, a friend can sit there and cry with you and say, would you like some water? How can I bring comfort to you? But a doctor, they're going to feel with you, but they're going to give you, they got a treatment for you, right? I'm saying let's move from just friend to doctor or nurse. So empathy means giving a man a fish. Compassion means teaching them to fish. Empathy feels the hurt, but compassion heals the hurt. Empathy thinks short term. When displayed, we make things feel nicer today, but compassion thinks long term. We make things better for them years from now because we put tools in their hand to handle the stressors. We've got to move from taking the hardship away to saying, I'm going to help you be strong enough that you're going to endure that hard. You're going to write me a thank you note when you're 30 because I gave you tools at 15 years old or whatever. So let me close with a quick story, Andrew. I feel like stories are a good place to close. High compassion means having high belief and high expectation. We talk a lot about that at Growing Leaders. High belief, we believe you can do it, Miss Student, but high expectation. And I know and will expect you to do it. So in an employee-employer setting, I got to interview some people that went into the new book, The Future Begins with Z. I want to tell you one of the stories from the book. So Dan is an incredible example of a compassionate employer. Years ago, when Samantha, a young staff person, approached him saying she really struggled to keep up as she battled anxiety during her any given day, Dan replied with, I'm so sorry to hear that, but I'm glad you told me. Let's work together to beat this challenge. What do you say? Well, she smiled and said, well, what do you have in mind? And Dan then created something he called his training wheels plan. Don't you love that? Training wheels. He placed some training wheels on her work shift until she felt she could do them well, the task well, without much mental anguish. She pedaled, if you will, but someone was with her to make sure she kept moving forward. Truth be told, Dan said he began to look at his team much like general managers look at their baseball teams. They sign talented players, athletes that they know not only have major league potential, but could be all-stars. First, however, they let them spend a little time in the minor leagues, right, to get them ready. Dayton Moore is a friend of ours, right? He's now with the Texas Rangers. Dayton did this for Alex Gordon, Salvi Perez, and Eric Hosmer and Mike Moustakas when he was general manager of the Kansas City Royals. He knew the talent was inside them, but he took time to develop them along the way. They not only became Major League All-Stars, but won a World Series. Well, Dan did this for Samantha as a retailer. He prioritized development before duty. Can I say that again? He prioritized development before duty. Instead of expecting you to be perfect, I'm going to stay with you a little while until now you can do it on your own. So he knew if he developed his sharp young hires, those duties would take care of themselves. And that's exactly what happened for Samantha under Dan's leadership. And I think she became an all-star for him. So maybe if we could think of things this way, it makes us better leaders along the way for these students.
Okay, when Tim started talking about training wheels, I felt that in my soul. Because I just got a MacBook after years of being a PC person. And let me just tell you, I am fully in the training wheels phase. Every listener, please pray for me. Send your well wishes. I accept cards.
Sometimes Gina sends me messages and says, hey, how do I?
Where's that thing?
And I just have to respond, you can do it, Gina.
And also, I am not an Android user. So it's not like I'm completely...
You were already in the Apple ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm special.
So good.
Anyways, training wheels.
I think it's helpful how Tim brought it all together, right? The whole conversation has been full of clarity and conviction. That shift that he talks about from empathy to compassion is a game changer. It's not about feeling with someone or just feeling with someone. I think it's about staying in the work with them, developing them, believing they can actually get stronger and better.
Yeah, it's like empathy says, I'm here with you. But the compassion says, I'm here with you and I'm not leaving until we figure this out.
Yep.
It's a challenge to all of us, not just for us with students, but for anybody in our circle that we interact with, right? To believe in students and young adults we're leading, we really need to believe in them and then stick around long enough to walk beside them until they believe in themselves too.
Yeah. And then we will experience that phrase that Tim said. He said, you'll thank me when you're 30, right? And of course, no Gen Zer wants to hear that. But to me, that really stands out because I think if we can keep that perspective, that long view, then it'll help us in our present as we're interacting with them. When we're willing to develop people with that kind of patience and purpose, we will shape more than just their career. We'll also shape their character.
Yeah, and that's the heartbeat of this whole episode, building connection and capacity in Gen Z. It's, I think sometimes we might think, for those of us that aren't in Gen Z, that do we have time? Do we have time to do this well? Do we have time to walk with somebody well? Yes, we do.
Yep.
We prioritize what's important. And this, my friends, is important. From candles and brush fires to PTG to training wheels, Tim gave us so much.
Yeah. Yeah. So whether you're leading students in a classroom, coaching young team members at work, we hope this conversation gave you practical tools and maybe even a mindset shift or two for walking with Gen Z in a way that matters. And it's a powerful way to wrap up the episode. So now, since we gave you so much information, we need to simplify. We call this next section DMI.
Hey.
That stands, of course, for Don't Miss It. Gina and I will each highlight something from today's episode that we think you should pay special attention to and certainly not miss. So, Gina, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, you kind of underlined it in your reflection after one of the segments, but Tim talks about helping Gen Z to reframe, not to run away, right? And so in particular, Tim gave us the acronym RARE, resolve, adapt, reverse, and excel. And really just it's about turning a disadvantage into an advantage. It's, walking through something that might seem really hard or, almost incomprehensible how you could address it, but it's not walking away from it. It's digging in and it's pushing through it or pushing past it. And I believe that this generation has the grit to do it, but sometimes we need a little help along the way. And the rest of us are here to help them. Yeah.
The thing that could stick us is not our ability, but our perspective. And that's ultimately what you're talking about.
How about you? What was your DMI for today?
Well, he brought up something he and I have talked about before. Much of this he and I have engaged with before, but it was such a good reminder for me, especially as I think about educators practically engaging Generation Z, especially a stressed out Generation Z,
Right.
either as students or staff. You know, a lot of times when people bring up stress and anxiety, it can feel as a leader like they're asking you to be a therapist, you know? And I've met so many principals who are like, listen, I got a lot going on. I don't have time to be their therapist, right? And what I love is he offered a set of practical tips that I think any educator, any classroom teacher, any building leader could do, and that can help with some of that anxiety without putting the pressure on a leader to try and be the therapist for everybody in their building. So he talked about 4 things. They all spell the word M. I don't think he referenced it this way, but it's a helpful tool for me to remember it. He said there are 4 things that help lower stress when we're engaging Generation Z. The first one is helping them monotask rather than multitask, right? He talked about how easy it is for them to get so caught up in all the different activities and things. And if we can help them just focus on one thing at a time, it will help lower their stress. That's something any building leader could do, right? He talked about managing your margin, right? So do we have points in our day? Do we actually schedule time in our day where nothing's happening?
Yeah.
And there can be a 5-minute break, right? Or a 20-minute recess or 15 minutes to like sit and just think. Whatever it is, those kinds of activities can be really, really helpful, creating margin in your day. Another one he mentioned is movement. How are you creating intentional times for physical activity? I've met teachers who take their students outside for 10 minutes during a class period or just other strategic things, but getting students and even staff moving for different parts can be really helpful for lowering stress. And the last thing he mentioned was management, recognizing when there are moments, whether it's a student or a staff member, where those other things, monotasking and getting margin in your day and movement, where those things aren't enough, to say, to recognize that and go, hey, have you thought about talking to somebody about this? I think if those tools were in every educator's tool belt, it would make a massive difference for how we help Generation Zs, particularly navigate this problem with anxiety and stress and all those things.
Well said. Well said.
Well, friends, thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of the School on a Mission podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, remember to click the link in the description to buy a copy of Tim's new book, The Future Begins with Z. Now, before you hit skip on to your next podcast, we've got a little challenge for you. Grab a pen, a notebook, a sticky note, or perhaps even the back of your hand. And we want you to write down one action step you're going to take this week. Maybe it's something you're going to do, something you're going to investigate, something you're going to read more about, or a person you want to meet with. Whatever it is, write it down. Got it? Perfect. Now shoot us a DM with that action step. We cannot wait to see what you're up to. Until next time, folks, stay curious, stay bold, and keep leading your school on a mission.
Thanks for listening in to this episode of School on a Mission, a podcast for educators by educators, produced by Growing Leaders and powered by the Maxwell Leadership Foundation. To learn more about Growing Leaders, visit growingleaders.com. And for more information about the School on a Mission podcast, head to schoolonamissionpodcast.com.